out there. Where the hell are they? We have 2 tanks in our wire right now.
Paul Longgrear insists he never suffered from the debilitating post-traumatic stress disorder that afflicts so many other veterans. There have been no nights filled with horrific dreams or days filled with empty stares and flashbacks. Whenever Vietnam has crossed his mind over the past 40 years, he says he's only thought of the men left behind, men whose bodies only recently received a proper soldier's burial. And on a steamy July afternoon at Fort Benning, Georgia, when the focus is on his own leadership in combat and his valiant defense of the American Special Forces camp at Lang Vei in February of 1968, he defers recognition to the fallen and to his family.
I want to acknowledge some of the folks that can't be here today. Eugene Ashley was awarded the Medal of Honor, saving me and 7 of my men. Also, Dennis Thompson and Gordon Brandy spent 5 years as prisoners of war. And Charlie Lindewall and Jim Moreland lied rotting in the jungle for 38 and 41 years until we were able to recover the remains. Rangers never leave anybody. Also, want to acknowledge my beloved family in whom I'm well pleased. Without their support, and my running around all over the world, this wouldn't have happened. God bless you, God bless America, and Rangers lead the way.
Longgrear has learned to approach Vietnam in spite of his near death there in an almost clinical fashion. His family describes him as unemotional or matter-of-fact with respect to the war. Vietnam, to Paul Longgrear, was something that simply happened to an ordinary career soldier. But Longgrear's story is, in fact, extraordinary. Some might even call it miraculous. If not for what he calls divine intervention, his name would have had its place alongside the 58,000 other names etched into black granite at the Vietnam Veterans Memorial. And it is also true that Vietnam deeply affected Longgrear. It reinforced his love of country, his hatred of communism, solidified his views of order and justice, and ultimately brought about the faith he holds so dearly today.
I never miss a chance to say something when there's a group, but there are children here. I would tell you what he was like as a tactical officer in OCS. He was the meanest, nastiest person in the world, and about 10 or 12 years ago, we started trying to find everybody, and we've located 175 out of 177 class and cadre. Unfortunately, 27 are deceased. But when we found Paul, he was bringing Jews out of Russia back to Israel. And he said he was a preacher, and I said, nah, the Paul Longgrear I know is... I said, that's got to be the wrong Paul Longgrear. But it wasn't. And I'm proud to know him. He's a wonderful man.
Thank you.
Inspiration.
The Longgrear children grew up in the shadow of the war, but rarely discussed it with their father. Now, with all of them in their 40s, they have heard the story of Lang Vei told often enough to audiences and veterans groups to push back the emotion associated with it. But the sorrow of Vietnam is something Paul and his wife Patty have known full well. They had to come to terms with the grief the war brought to their home. 41 years after Paul Longgrear left Vietnam for the last time, the Longgrear family agreed to return to the country to explore the war's effect on their family. What would they find there? What feelings would the journey provoke? Would this visit to one of the few remaining communist nations in the world provide greater insight into the past of this husband and father? And could the return help others understand how to deal with the emotional and spiritual anguish many soldiers still feel over Vietnam?
He's never really shown us things that shook him to the core. And I'm sure that the things that he saw and witnessed and experienced there do have deep emotion that are attached. And so I probably will get to see a vulnerability that I've never seen before. He's very controlled on a whole. And that's a little bit daunting to think that I'm going to get to witness a side of him that I've never seen before.
I'm not really sure how I expect him to react, my father to react to being back. He's always been pretty open about his experiences in Vietnam, speaks about them quite often to groups, and so I've heard the stories many times. But they're usually with little emotion, so I would imagine being back there after 40 years and even seeing some of the sights maybe, I can only imagine that he would be a little emotional about that.
Probably for our family, this will allow us to even see maybe a more inner glimpse of Dad than we even have, and get to relive a little bit of an impactful part of his life, obviously, with him.
Paul Longgrear was born in Cairo, Illinois in 1943. Shortly after his birth, his father left on an errand but never returned. Abandoned, his mother moved to rural Arkansas. Longgrear grew into a natural leader among his peers, but also with a penchant for causing trouble. Frustrated and bored, perhaps angered by the absence of his father, Longgrear left Arkansas to finish high school up in Oregon.
He didn't have a father in the home. His father left, I think, when he was 2. He had a number of stepfathers, guys in and out of his life. Don't think he had a real father figure or a good role model of what a man was.
He was going down a bad path. He had, I think, gotten kicked out of college for poor grades and maybe some altercations with other students.
He, at one time, had a woman under each arm and a bottle of beer in each hand. So I think he had the macho image, the image of almost invincible.
Many assumed he was and would always remain an underachiever. Longgrear left college after only a few weeks and found steady work following construction up and down the West Coast. He also found plenty of ways to cause trouble. He was a heavy drinker, had a string of girlfriends, and at one time was even an initiate in the Hells Angels motorcycle club.
Growing up without a father was somewhat frustrating because I think there's a vacuum or a void in every boy to look to a man as a role model to develop into manhood. And my mother was a single parent. I went through a number of stepfathers. But I think the biggest thing that I struggled with was the way I felt other adults looked down at me because I didn't have the typical family. And I think part of my problem with the attitude that I had toward life was that it wasn't real challenging. I was always kind of mature for my age. I had a false identification card at 14 that said I was 21, so my buddies and I go drink beer and stuff.
A young man spiraling downward seemed to change course when he received a telegram in 1965.
When I finally graduated from high school in another state, had to go there because of trouble, and I got my draft notice in 1965. When I went in the Army, it gave me an opportunity to be able to find a situation that was structured. My problem going through life was I couldn't find anybody that was in charge. People would make rules, then they wouldn't enforce the rules, and that would frustrate me.
Longgrear found the military regimen appealing. There was a consistent chain of cause and effect in the military. High performance translated to rewards and leadership opportunities. Poor performance and disobedience resulted in punishment. And most of all, leaders did not abandon those for whom they were responsible. Within days, Longgrear had earned the trust of his superiors and was placed in charge of other recruits. After additional training, he was identified as a potential drill instructor. Training other recruits, however, was not what he wanted. Longgrear, true to his personality, was itching for a fight. He wanted to go to Vietnam. He wanted combat. Longgrear soon was selected for officer candidate school. He graduated at the top of his class. He also completed jump school, and though he wanted to go to Southeast Asia, he was retained to teach infantry tactics. But in his personal life, little had changed. He was still the same unsettled young man, known for training 16 hours a day and then drinking and carousing until the early hours. 6, sometimes 7 days a week. And then he met the daughter of a retired colonel, and Paul Longgrear fell in love.
I had gone one night to the gym to work out. Well, I had stopped at a little 7-Eleven on the way. And Paul was in there with his roommate and getting some groceries or something like that. And he was the most handsome man I had ever seen.
And this really good-looking girl came in and had on workout outfit. And so I kind of like, I'm looking at her, you know, and thinking, whoa, you know, man. So she left. And I said, come on, Chadwell, let's go, man, let's go. And he said, no, I want to go ahead and fill out a card. We need to get a card so we can cash these checks. You know, I said, come on, man, because I wanted to follow her and see where she went, get her, you know, find out who she was.
So he just shows up at the office, the office where I was working.
So I drove over to her office. And I walked up to her desk, you know, just stood there looking down at her, and she was tired when she looked up. She hit all the keys with all her fingers, all of her things on the old typewriter. Remember they had the old irons that would throw a key up. Well, they locked up.
And then I glanced up, and it was Paul, and oh my goodness, I just totally messed up. This was back in the days, we didn't have computers then. It was, you know, electric typewriter, and you just totally mess everything you're doing up. So I met him, and the rest is history.
Within months, Paul and Patty were married, and he was on his way to a 4-month selection course to the U.S. Army's Special Warfare School. Longgrear earned the coveted Green Beret, and within a year was ordered to Vietnam.
When he left, it was really, we had a 3-week-old baby. This was our first child, and he left, and of course it was just, I was an emotional roller coaster anyway, and he wouldn't let me take him to the airport.
And the last thing that she said to me standing on the front porch was, I'll be praying for you. And she also said, I'll send you Rice Krispie Squares. And I said, don't forget the Rice Krispie Squares.
Paul would not let me take him to the airport. And because he wanted to do that emotional disconnect before he left the house. He didn't want it in the airport. He wanted to cut that thing and go on and move into the warrior mode. On that day that he left, I said, I'll be praying for you, and I'll send you Rice Krispie treats. And he did say, and don't forget the Rice Krispie treats.
Prayer, I mean, I was fine with prayer. You could pray if you wanted to. It didn't bother me one way or the other. That was the essence of the front porch departure.
Longgrear arrived in Da Nang on November 12, 1967. He was given charge of a company of indigenous soldiers known as Montagnards. Longgrear's job was to create a highly effective mobile strike force, or Mike Force.
Known to the outside world by the French term Montagnards, or mountain people, they are known to themselves by such tribal names as Rade and Hmong, are vastly different from the light-skinned lowlanders whom the world knows as Vietnamese. Believed to be the original inhabitants of the region before the arrival of the Vietnamese more than 2,000 years ago, most of the Montagnards continue to live a Stone Age existence in the midst of the 20th century. Tough, muscular, a skilled hunter and woodsman, a man of great personal courage, the Montagnard holds the key to a strategically vital area of Southeast Asia. If he can be won to the government's cause and given the training and equipment to resist communist terrorism, the guerrillas' jungle sanctuary in the Vietnamese highlands will disappear. With this in mind, United States military advisors and the government of Vietnam early in the 1960s began a program to win the active allegiance of the Montagnards. Their primary objective was to seal off the hidden supply routes through the mountains from the communist north.
3 days before Christmas 1967, Longgrear and his Montagnards were moved from Da Nang to a special forces camp a mere 1,500 meters from the Laotian border, and only 7 miles from the famous Marine combat base at Khe Sanh.
This camp at Lang Vei serves as a patrol base for civilian irregular defense group operations, mainly to effect border surveillance and also to interdict infiltration. Because the high ground you see across the river is a mere 2 kilometers away. And the fact that the enemy can mass without interference behind that does result in some danger to the camp.
Enemy activity around the camp had increased, leading Longgrear to write to his father-in-law.
Intel says the new camp is supposed to be overrun around Tet. It'll be hairy if they do. There's a regiment less than 3 kilometers away in Laos. Look for Lang Vei in the newspapers. P.S. Don't say anything to Patty or Mom.
He would never have shared a fear or a concern, or because he would have been concerned about what that would have done to me.
It is 12:05 a.m. when the Longgrear's plane arrives in Saigon. Nearly 30 hours of travel have left them exhausted, but eagerly anticipating what they will find. The heat and the humidity, even at midnight, are stifling, but arriving in the dark provides Paul Longgrear with a pleasant surprise when he wakes to find a very different Vietnam than he left 40 years ago. Saigon, or Ho Chi Minh City, as it is referred to in all the official Communist Party communications, is a bustling city, not all that different from any other large city in Asia. Its 9 million residents seem to defy the stereotypes of a repressive communist regime. They take life in stride, even when certain death is only inches away. Saigon is the nation's capitalist showpiece. Though the average income of its residents is only $2,800 a year, most seem to have at least a motorbike and a cell phone. While access to social networking sites, tools used by most American teenagers, is closely monitored, in some cases forbidden, many markets now stock American products and Western fashions. Relations between the United States and Vietnam were normalized in 1995, a few years before Vietnam threw open its doors to direct foreign investment. Many U.S. companies were quick to launch operations in Vietnam, but it is still an awkward relationship. Most Vietnamese want American dollars, but the government still teaches that America is responsible for all of Vietnam's problems, past and present. Nowhere is this more evident than during the first stops the Longgrears make in Vietnam, at the place where the war ended on April 30th, 1975, and at the War Remnants Museum. The Reunification Palace, as it is now known, was once the presidential palace of the Republic of South Vietnam. It was the symbol of a free South Vietnam. Now it is a teaching opportunity for the communists. The Longgrears are shown the interior of the palace, but Paul Longgrear's discomfort is palpable. He is a man who hates evil, and he regards communism as one of the world's great evils. It is difficult for him to listen to the praises of Ho Chi Minh.
I think any soldier that fought in the war, watching television on April 30th, 1975, had different thoughts. My thought is that the South Vietnamese have given it up. You know, be brutally honest and very frank. The South Vietnamese held very little respect with American soldiers because we didn't see them as committed and dedicated as they need to be to overcome a communist force that has no choice but to do what they're told or die at the hands of their own government. I was very concerned for the Vietnamese that it served us because I know how communism works. There's a great price to pay. They're very, very great on retribution.
As he tours the grounds, the presence of cameras focused on him attracts the attention of another tourist, a Danish-born citizen of Canada. Their conversation takes place within earshot of the minder assigned to the film crew.
Is that first time you are back after the war?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, first time.
So what are your impression of Vietnam today when you come here?
To be honest with you, I'm surprised at how developed Saigon is. I just got here, so I've only seen Saigon.
Yeah.
Last night, I was very surprised at the number of lights in the dark at night, because when I was here in the war, we would get on the helicopter to fly off to do a patrol at night, and we would see no lights except maybe the enemy would have a fire cooking or something like that. That's the biggest impression. And also all the tall buildings and all the foreign countries.
At first, the visit between the two seems innocuous. But Longgrear interrupts the man when he learns that this Canadian believes communism has benefited Vietnam.
And one other thing I'm very happy about is to see after that big war and all that suffering the Vietnamese people have going through.
Let me comment on that.
Yes.
One of the reasons that they have done such a great job with Saigon is because they want the world to come and see that they were right.
Oh, okay, sure.
It's very important that the propaganda.
Yes.
Communism is on a decline. There's only Cuba, China,
You're
North
right.
Korea,
You're right.
and so this is the showcase. We make this look very good, and then people say, communism is good.
Yes.
But if they go to North Vietnam, or if they walk 1 mile out of the city, they see how people live under communism.
Sure.
So you're right, and it does look very good.
Yes, exactly.
But it doesn't.
No. I am aware of that.
At Saigon's War Remnants Museum, another propaganda site, Longgrear and his family are understandably uncomfortable with the content of the exhibits. The Vietnamese government has invested millions of dollars in educating its citizens on alleged American atrocities in the war. Pictures of beheadings, burned and twisted bodies, and well-known incidents like the My Lai massacre fill the walls. Agent Orange, a defoliant sprayed from U.S. airplanes to reveal Viet Cong activity, is said to be the cause of all diseases and birth defects in Vietnam. While Longgrear admits that incidents like My Lai occurred, he calls the other events isolated incidents. His sons feel the same way.
Actually, when we first got to the War Museum, I enjoyed the first room that we went in. The photos and some of the descriptions of things that had happened, it seemed like most of it was fairly accurate. But as we went on and got to the war of aggression by the U.S. type stuff, it just kind of irritated me that everything was turned around like the U.S. is the big bad enemy, and everybody here wanted communism and the North to prevail, even the South, and that's just kind of the way it was presented. And I don't know, it kind of irritated me, to be honest with you, that we had folks over here dying, trying to help them, and then it's been turned around like everything we did was bad and wrong.
For daughter Honey Lee, who agrees that the museum is propaganda rather than history, she is nonetheless saddened by the pictures of deformed and deceased children, both Vietnamese and American.
I don't think we know in America what a war-torn country looks like. I don't think we necessarily, we know what our men face when they come home, but I don't think we see what it does to the land where they currently are. And there's innocence on both sides. Hopefully there was some hope left here too, that things aren't as stringent as they would have been otherwise with the regime that was left in place.
The family leaves the museum understanding the proverb that history is written by the victors. No mention is made of the tens of thousands of political opponents of Ho Chi Minh purged from 1945 to 1954, Viet Cong atrocities during the war, or the countless numbers of imprisoned and executed following the collapse of South Vietnam in 1975.
There's one tank on the hill with us. It's 7 tanks in all. This is Spunky Hansen 6. Request airstrike or anything else you can give us that establish coordinates north and west of you. We need Spunky to work the south edge of the perimeter. Say again, south edge of the perimeter.
On January 22, 1968, the Marines at the Khe Sanh combat base began hearing desperate calls for help over the radio. Elements of the North Vietnamese Army, supported by at least 7 tanks, were overrunning the Royal Laotian Army's 33rd Battalion, known as the Elephant Battalion, just a few miles from the border. Though American aircraft were sent to the area, poor weather prevented them from dropping bombs or even seeing the tanks. But 2 days later, a long and haggard line of 2,000 Laotian refugees crossed the border into Vietnam and made their way toward the Special Forces camp at Lang Vei. Longgrear and another Army officer flew over the column, which stretched along Highway 9. The women and children in the column were followed by 500 soldiers from the Elephant Battalion. When he landed at Lang Vei, Longgrear grabbed his automatic weapon and stood in the middle of Highway 9.
My boss, Major Hussar, says, I want you to disarm them before they get past the LP. And so I took my yards and I lined them along the road in an ambush form, and when they walked up, we stopped them, and I made them put their weapons in a pile over alongside the road, and then, which was a bad mistake. This Laotian lieutenant come running up, and he was wearing a U.S. Army Ranger tab, jump wings, and speaking English, but he was carrying an AK-47. And I said, and I just sort of raised my rifle up. I had it slung on. I said, put the weapon over there. And he looked at it and he said, oh. So he put the weapon down. So now we've got a very interesting problem. We've got 2,200 women and children and 500 non-combatant soldiers that we are now responsible for. Well, this is one of the smartest things that I saw the great North Vietnamese general do. General Giap actually planned that. He sent them over there knowing that it would tax logistics unbelievably. You can imagine 2,200 women and children got diseases, they've got all kinds of problems. You got to feed them, they're hungry, and we just weren't prepared for that. And it really distracted us from some of the preparation we could have done for the attack itself.
It wasn't long before the Laotian officers reported that they had been overrun by tanks. Longgrear and his men knew an attack on Lang Vei was in the works. With the Longgrears settling into Vietnam, they are becoming comfortable with the local food and accustomed to the sights of Saigon. But once they leave the city, the scenery changes. For miles and miles, houses and shops line the streets. Poverty is rampant. Away from the major cities, the average family in Vietnam survives on just $1,100 a year. Government billboards promise new developments and modern housing complexes, but there are few to be found. Still, most of the people seem happy and content with their surroundings. This Vietnam looks like the Vietnam of the 1960s. It is a strange and almost surreal time warp.
Cu Chi, the land of peaceful gardens, cool shadows, and lush tropical fruit trees all year round. The Americans wanted to turn Cu Chi a dead land, but Cu Chi still lives strongly. Unable to survive on the land surface, they choose to live underground. Everything in the daily life can be found at this tunnel system. The Americans wanted to turn Cu Chi a dead land, but Cu Chi never dies. Cu Chi's little guerrillas with rudimentary weapons could fight away their powerful enemy. Sometimes the guerrillas emerge to snipe, sometimes they hit their enemy from the back. They appeared and disappeared so suddenly that American Army commanders have set in panic. Viet Cong soldiers are seen nowhere, but they are everywhere.
"30 miles outside of Saigon, the Longgrear's sons visit an infamous site of the Vietnam War, the tunnels of Cu Chi. Here, Bo and Bubba learn how the enemy fought the war. They listen to their guide, ask questions, and try to understand how the Viet Cong could live, work, and fight as deep as 10 meters below ground.
Well, over here, if we open it, grenade or landmine blows up, and over there they got enough time and
Get out?
Yeah, so they have to make the tunnel entrance far away from the bunker. Yeah. Every tunnel entrance have to be far away from the bunker.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because of the grenade.
Yeah. Grenade or landmine under here, and they made it of wood. You see wood?
Yeah.
What for? You see the frame and the cover. So when you put the lid on, the gap is very tight. In the rainy season, when the water rub on it, the wood is pained, so it fit together. So water doesn't get down there. You know.
Okay.
So they have to make it by wood.
Being in the jungle and seeing the landmines, seeing the tunnels really makes it a reality. And I have much more respect for the guys that were here fighting, risking their lives than I did before.
Being in the tunnels, 10 meters or 20 meters or whatever we were below the ground, not knowing what's around the next corner in the dark, and you know you're probably chasing someone. I may get trapped down here. I may get killed, whatever, below the ground, never be found. What we did today is so far from what those guys did because the threat to us was minimal, if anything. But when you were down there with the enemy, I can't imagine.
A few days after the Laotians arrived, a young North Vietnamese soldier walked into the Special Forces camp at Lang Vei to surrender. He had been battered by a constant barrage of B-52 strikes near Khe Sanh. From his unit's position, he could see Lang Vei. The NVA private had deserted his post in the night and walked to Lang Vei. Asked about the presence of tanks in the area, he claimed to know nothing about them, but many of the Special Forces soldiers were skeptical. On January 30th, Longgrear and his Montagnards began aggressive patrols around Lang Vei and Khe Sanh village, 6 kilometers away. There, they encountered hundreds of NVA during the enemy's afternoon rest period.
We got up there and were running their long-range patrols while the camp was being rebuilt. It had been overrun a few months before. And so while it was being rebuilt, we were running long-range patrols up and down the Ho Chi Minh Trail. And then we got a radio message to come inside the perimeter because there's going to be an attack. So we moved inside the perimeter and started fitting in with the defensive concept.
If there was a large force of NVA near Khe Sanh, Longgrear wondered what there must be less than a mile away in Laos. In reality, there were nearly 4,000 soldiers and support troops waiting to strike. There were only 24 Americans at Lang Vei, and some 500 Montagnards and South Vietnamese Special Forces. The odds hardly seemed good, and many of the soldiers knew it. But Longgrear trusted his Montagnards. One of Paul Longgrear's deepest regrets about leaving Vietnam was the abandonment of the Montagnards, America's steadfast allies in the Vietnam War. On this trip, he is keenly interested in learning about the conditions they now face. Though hated by both the North and South Vietnamese, who regarded them as savages, they preferred to govern themselves and be left alone. Many Montagnards had never seen a white or black man when the first Special Forces advisors arrived. They had also never used modern firearms. The Montagnards were enlisted by the Central Intelligence Agency and Army Special Forces in the early 1960s to fight the Viet Cong at NVA. They were particularly good in the jungle and very loyal to their American counterparts.
Whoever plants mines and booby traps will leave a sign for their people. And so they would see just a pair of twigs, maybe right in the path, like that right there. Okay, see, that doesn't look like anything. And they'd stop, they'd hold their hand up. They would see a wire that'd come down, and what would happen is Once you step past this, maybe 4 or 5 feet, there would be a trigger of some sort, and then it would explode. So they would immediately, anything that had been placed by man, they would immediately spot it. So once you make a friend amongst a Montagnard, you're brothers. You're no longer just friends, you're brothers. You develop a relationship where you're laying your life in his hands, and he's laying his life in your hands. And you laugh together, you cry together, you kill together, and you die together. And that's just, there was no Montagnard American as far as brother went. It was all the same. But I've known Montagnard to die for an American, and I've known an American to die for a Montagnard.
The Longgrears visit 3 Montagnard villages during their time in Vietnam. The primitive houses where they live boast TV antennas, in some cases satellite dishes, but they are still a primitive people, tied to the land and to family. Education is offered to Montagnard children, but most do not pursue it. Instead, they prefer to stay near their homes and to work in the rice fields or on the coffee plantations. At one village, Longgrear feels that he is visiting a human zoo.
To the victor goes the spoils. When America pulled out and left them, we left them to the desires of the Vietnamese. And a lot of Special Forces guys, have a drink to them daily, weep over them. But our government pulled out on them and left them, even after they were so fiercely loyal and died for us and saved our lives and everything. And this is the result, but to the victor goes the spoils.
Longgrear seems to be more at ease when he makes swift friends with a Jarai guide named Cham. Cham's father was the only ethnic minority colonel in the South Vietnamese army at one time, and through his relationship with American missionaries in the 1970s, Cham was able to travel to the United States, where he helped translate the Bible into the Jarai language. Cham leads the family to a Benar village, where the family can observe traditional Montagnard customs, gong music, dancing, and the consumption of num pai, or rice wine. Many of the songs tell of spirits and sacrifices of water buffaloes, though many Montagnards are now Christian and no longer engage in the practice. Seeing the village festivities and the young Montagnard men, Longgrear is quickly drawn back to the 1960s and his days with the Mike Force.
Now this is the type guy that was still fighting back when I was in Special Forces. Look at his shoulders, his arms, how strong his features are, and his pride. See how his shoulders are back, his head's up? He knows he's a good man. And that's the type Montagnard man that we had in the Mobile Strike Force.
Much of Paul Longgrear's time in Vietnam was spent in the jungle with his Montagnard soldiers, but his second tour in Vietnam saw him overseeing an infantry company near Chu Lai in 1969 and 70. Commanding an infantry company was far different than the Special Forces. His new job required moving large units of men into combat. The men were sometimes physically and emotionally spent by the day-to-day grind of combat. On the first day Longgrear took command of the infantry company, he lost a soldier. I picked the 2nd platoon, which I had ascertained may have been my weakest platoon, and I told them, okay, the rest of the company going to stay here. I want to sweep that area, and I'm going to go with you, because I wanted to evaluate the leadership in that platoon. While we're on line and we're moving through that area, I noticed that the platoon sergeant was back over here, and some of the privates were out in front, and two of the Puerto Rican privates were walking along talking and joking and carrying on. And a lot of times when kids lose hope, they get stupid. And these kids were they were very clumsy, they were very awkward, they weren't doing a real good job. And I was getting angry because that's the way people get killed. And I saw my job as to keep them alive. And so I called the platoon sergeant. He was the only E7 I had in the whole company. I called him over
And I said, go over there and spread those two kids, get them apart and tell them to start getting military. They're walking along joking. And so he started to move toward them. He got about halfway from me to them, and one of them triggered a booby trap. And there were 4 or 5 men wounded. One of them was killed and one was wounded fairly severely. The kid that was killed was the Puerto Rican kid that was walking with the one that triggered the booby trap. The one that actually triggered it was hurt bad, but he was not killed. The kid that was walking with him was the one that was killed.
That soldier killed was the last man he lost in combat until the final week of his second tour. But there was another loss that hit much closer to home. Patty Longgrear's brother, Fred Jackson, followed in his own father's footsteps and chose a military career. He was a graduate of the Citadel and had already completed one combat tour in Vietnam with the 1st Infantry Division in the early days of the war. He returned home to earn his pilot's wings, and by 1969 was back in Vietnam as a Cobra gunship pilot. On a mission in September 1969, Jackson's aircraft was supporting a company of infantry near the Cambodian border when 51 caliber gunfire ripped through the helicopter. Jackson believed he could safely transport the chopper to a nearby airfield at Loc Ninh.
He was a member of the 11th Armored Cavalry Regiment, and he was a platoon leader flying a Cobra, which of course was a gunship, and he was hit. His wingman said, "You want to set it down?" And he said, "You're smoking." He said, "No, I think I can get it back." So they weren't too far from this runway. He said, "I think I can get it back and set it down in one piece and we can rebuild it and it'll be okay." And that's just the kind of guy he was. He wasn't just going to throw the aircraft away if it's going to be okay. And so his wingman then said, all of a sudden he looked over and the aircraft just exploded in the air. I guess there was a fuel leak or something and where that smoke was coming from, and it exploded in the air. And praise God, he was dead before he hit the ground. So he never felt a thing, never knew anything whatsoever.
The story that I've been told was that my grandfather was standing upstairs shaving and happened to look out the window and saw the Jeep pull up in front of the house. And, you know, did everything he could to get down and intervene or intercept my grandmother answering the door.
When he heard the car come and stop, he just glanced out the window. And when he saw the notification officer and the chaplain in their uniforms, he knew what that meant, but he didn't know who it was. So he ran downstairs and answered the door. And of course, we were busy. We didn't pay any attention to it. And then I remember coming downstairs, and Daddy had already called Rosalind, my sister-in-law, down, and they were all sitting in the family room, and it was a tough day.
My grandmother talks about my uncle to this day, and what a sweet, precious man he was, and how he was extremely attractive and just always kind to the underdog. And often says how much Bubba reminds her of Freddie. And he's named after Freddie and my granddaddy, his real name.
On the Longgrear's journey to Vietnam, they returned to the location where a beloved brother gave his life for the freedom of the Vietnamese people. It is here, after having seen the poverty and crumbling infrastructure of Vietnam, that Patty Longgrear experiences an unexpected sense of bewilderment over the death of her brother.
I never thought this before in 40-something years, but because I knew that this was part of God's plan for Fred's life. It was not a devastating thing. He just went to glory faster than the rest of us. But I did, as I traveled through the countryside, I had to think, what a waste. You know, if Fred died for this, what a waste.
Fred's attitude was, that I want to serve my country. I want to be a professional soldier. This is the only war we have, and so I want to go to this war. If I get killed in this, what he's told his mother and dad, he said, if I get killed in this war, I want you to remember that I'm doing what I enjoy doing, and I'm willing to die if I have to do that. And so that brought great comfort and peace to the family, because that was his attitude.
As night began to fall on February 6, 1968, Longgrear and his Mike Force sergeants, Harvey Brandy, Earl Burke, John Early, and James Moreland, were pulled into the camp to help defend it. The camp's concrete bunker had been designed to withstand frequent artillery assaults from Laos, but an unusually high volume of fire began coming in at 6 p.m. Longgrear's trusted sergeant, Charlie Lindewald, who had been in Vietnam for 6 years, was sent to the observation post outside the camp's perimeter.
When we pulled back into the camp to get ready for the attack, we would send out an LP, a listening post. That's a military thing that we do to try to detect the enemy before they get to the perimeter, and that way we'll be prepared. And so every night we would send out a patrol. Well, this particular night, it was Charlie and Sergeant Hannah from the A-Team. Kenneth Hanna. So they went out and didn't get very far out, maybe 200 or 300 meters, and all of a sudden there was all kinds of shooting and explosion and everything, and they come running back in. And so I went to them and what's up? And I said, sir, the yards just started shooting and carrying on. I said, well, did you guys see anything? I said, no, we didn't see anything. I said, well, I'll tell you what. I said, go ahead and disperse back in. I said, you know, obviously the yard saw something. And the colonel came over. He happened to be there that night. And what's going on? So I explained it to him, and he said, I want those men back out there. And I said, sir, if the yards say there's NVA out there, then they're out there.
At 12:30 a.m., Lindewald reported movement below his position. An intense engagement erupted near the observation post. It was the last time Paul Longgrear's Mike Force Sergeant, Charlie Lindewald, was seen. Another Special Forces Sergeant, Kenneth Hanna, radioed that Lindewald had been mortally wounded, and within moments, Hanna too was dead.
They went right into the enemy and sat down right in the middle of them. Well, the first shots that were fired hit Charlie 3 times. According to Hanna, he called on the radio and said, I need a medevac. I need a medevac for Charlie. He's hit 3 times in the chest and stomach. And about that time, the radio went dead. Well, he had drugged Charlie back into a little tunnel-type bunker, hole in the ground, and was leaning over him talking on the radio, and they shot him and killed him, and he fell across Charlie. And so 37 years later, we've got to the bodies, and Hannah's skeleton was actually laying across, diagonally across Charlie's, where he had been over him trying to administer to him.
5 minutes later, the radio crackled with the voice of Sergeant Nicholas Fragos, one of the camp's regular team members. He confirmed the report of the Laotian soldiers from the week before. The NVA did, in fact, have tanks, and they were rolling over the wire. Longgrear and his fellow Green Berets began to attack the tanks.
I want you to put those hard bombs to the east of the camp entrance on the road, Jacksonville. 06 wants you to keep those flares coming. We have a very active tank on each end of the perimeter. Tanks and a lot of infantry coming into the camp.
When I fired at the PT-76, I was trying to put it into the driver's opening right there, the first one I fired at. And so I was about from here to that tree stump right there when I actually fired the first law, and it hit. They didn't have this deflector on there. It hit right there and went straight up into the sky like that. And that's when the tank stopped. And the main gun was already down because they'd been destroying bunkers. And that main gun goes and starts turning toward myself and the two guys that were in the mortar pit. And that's when we figured we better get out of the mortar pit. So that's when we took off.
Put your fire on the eastern end of the perimeter. There are more tanks coming, and we're going to have to do something soon. Tanks and a lot of infantry coming into the camp. Those tanks are tearing up 104 Company.
Two members of the original Special Forces team at Lang Vei, James Holt and Danny Phillips, worked with the other soldiers to destroy several tanks and defend against the infantry. Holt left his position to look for more ammunition and was never seen again. Phillips was partially blinded by an explosion and went missing later in the battle. By 2 a.m. it was clear the camp could not be held without reinforcements. Longgrear and other Special Forces soldiers called in continuous fire support from the Marine base at Quai Son, from the camp's reinforced concrete bunker. Other Green Berets at an older camp nearby, which had been overrun the year before, watched as the tanks rolled up to the bunker, called the Tactical Operations Center, or TOC. 8 men, including Longgrear and his Mike Force Sergeants Brandy, Early, and Moreland, were trapped in the bunker. Early and Moreland had already been severely wounded. Moreland was near death.
There's a tank right on top of the TOC, and it's giving us fits. We knocked one out.
Well, they'd had a tank on top of us that night trying to crush it in, and we, a little dust would fall, but that was about it. But they did destroy with the tank, they pushed down all the antennas and cut the wire to the generator, so it's pure black in there and no communication. So the next morning, they told us they're going to blow it up. And sure enough, they had planted a shape charge about, I guess, probably 12 or 15 feet underground alongside the wall of that thing. And when they exploded it, it blew a watch off my arm, busted my head open. Everybody was wounded, but at that time, they began to swarm. There were 100 or more, I don't know how many there were, but there were a bunch of them. And they actually started pouring gasoline in on us, throwing white phosphorus grenades in, set the place on fire. And 3 times, the 3 Special Forces soldiers tried to fight their way to us with some Laotian soldiers. And each time they got run off. I figured, well, this is it. And all during this battle inside, starting that morning, not until that morning when they blew it up, from that time on, there was this recording twirling around my head saying, "I'll be praying for you, I'll be praying for you, be praying for you." And I'm kind of like, okay, trying to shake it, But when those 3 guys got run off the first time, I sort of got over in the corner, and I looked around. I didn't want to, embarrass myself in front of my buddies here. I mean, had a lot of personal pride, false pride, but a lot of pride. And I said, look here, God. I said, I've lived the way I want to live. And I've chosen to live that way, and I'm prepared to die that way. But my wife and my daughter have never hurt anybody. My wife's a Christian, and my daughter's just a baby. And so I'm not asking anything for me, but I expect you to take care of them. You understand that?
The trip to Lang Vei, now 43 years after the battle, begins on a dreary morning in Hue. Lang Vei is a mere 120 kilometers, or 80 miles, from the ancient imperial city, but in Vietnam, 80 miles isn't easily covered. The trip will take 3 hours, plenty of time for reflection along the way. Longgrear and his family have been told that they will meet a North Vietnamese soldier who participated in the battle as a 19-year-old private. Now a retired colonel, Pham Huy Hai, has flown from Hanoi to Hue to meet Longgrear. On the way to Lang Vei, Colonel Pham pores over old maps of the camp and describes how he helped tanks cross the river from Laos to attack Lang Vei. His trip to Lang Vei is also his first since the attack on February 6th and 7th, 1968. It is clear that he is eagerly anticipating this meeting.
historically speaking, the enemy had to pull away, withdraw, because we had air superiority and fire superiority, and in daylight, they just didn't have much of an opportunity or hope. But this was the beginning of what became famously known as the Tet Offensive of 1968. They didn't pull out, they stayed there. So the next morning, right about the breaking of dawn, they called down into the talk and said, "We want you to surrender." Well, we made a few comments about their ancestry, and particularly their mama, and said, we're not coming out. Y'all might as well come on in. And so they said, "If you don't come out, we're going to blow the place up." And we're like, yuck, yuck. You know, we're 5 feet underground, the ceiling there. There's no way. So then we got communications established with the Marines at Quezon, and they told us that it was probably a trap. There was only 8 of us left alive. There would more of them be killed coming to rescue us than there was of us. So it didn't make sense to do it, and we were on our own. Well, militarily speaking, that makes sense. I can understand that, unless you're one of the 8 in the bunker, and then it doesn't make sense at all. And so my old man, the guy that I really was, rose up, and I began to curse, and I was angry and threatened to kill, everybody up on top of the ground. And then I told him, I said, "Look, you people can stay down here and die like worms. I'm going up on top of the ground and die like a man, and I'm taking my 2 men with me." I had 2 men in there that actually belonged to me. The other 5, the 4 belonged to the captain. So they said, the captain said, "Well, wait a minute, if the lieutenant's going, we're all going." This was about 3 o'clock the next afternoon. We hadn't had any water to drink. We're all bleeding. When we came out of the bunker, Specialist Moreland had been wounded in the head the evening before, as a matter of fact. And he laid there all night long, trying not to cry out in pain. We were all wounded. We were all trying to think of the other guys. And so when we started pairing up, I said, "Who's going to take Moreland?" And we were all wounded and shot up. And they said, "I can't carry him, I can't carry him." And I said, "Well, okay, if somebody will take point out, they said, "No, it's your idea, you go first." So we made a quality decision that we were going to leave Moreland. Emmanuel Phillips was the second oldest guy in there. He's a pretty mature guy, pretty sharp. And he said, let me see if I can't do it. Well, he went over, and he realized Moreland had died. And so we actually left Moreland's body there. And so we all started out. This, "I'll be praying for you, be praying for you." Get up on top of the ground. I'm leading the way since it was my idea. I get up on top of the ground, and here's these A1s are flying in, supporting us. Well, they had been dropping ordnance, and that was keeping the enemy blown away from us, so they couldn't get in and do any more harm to us. And what they figured out was they were hiding in our old fighting positions while these A1s were dropping bombs. Well, as soon as the A1s would have to leave, and before more got there, they'd be back on us again. And so the colonel, we'd called the colonel and told him we were coming out, and he said, "Okay, let's formulate a plan. They're going to make 3 wet runs, dropping ordnance, expending ordnance, and then they're going to keep flying over. Hopefully the enemy will not realize that they're being duped, and they will stay hidden, and that'll give us a better opportunity to get." And it was a great plan. And as far as, it's the only plan we had. And so we're up there, and these A1s, I get up to the ground first, and I look around there, and I don't see anybody moving or anything, and these A1s are coming in. And it's like, "Come on, guys. Come on, hurry up." I'm looking back down the stairwell that we came up. And so finally they got up on top of the ground. Well, as I'm waiting, I look, and here comes this A1. And this A1 looks, the pilot looks right down at me, and I look up at him. Now, up until that point, I didn't have any hope, didn't have any dream of getting out of there alive. But he took and he tipped his wings like that. Well, when he did, it gave me a surge of adrenaline that just, all of a sudden, I began to say, "Wait a minute, I'm not a dead man. I may make it out of here." And that was really a very important moment. the guys finally got up on top of the ground. And I said, all right, go that way. I've got you covered. And so I'm walking security for them, and all of a sudden, out of the corner of my eye, I see movement. And these two guys are sitting behind this machine gun. And they, they raise up, and I guess they heard something or something. They raise up and look, and when they did, well, I turned and assaulted them, and I was going to fire a burst of 6. Right before we left, I'd taken I had one magazine left of bullets. I took my bullets out, cleaned them off, made sure they worked, put it back in, and put one in the chamber, and I had 19 bullets. Well, I was going to I was going to shoot 18 of them at them, and then I was going to save one for me. I'd been in jail as a kid, and I wasn't going to be locked up again. I didn't like it. I don't want to be locked up, and especially in some foreign prison somewhere. And so I assaulted a machine gun, and I fired 3 rounds, and my rifle jammed. Well, I'd been wounded in the ankle with a hand grenade, and it popped, and I flipped on my back. The last thing that I said to my guys was, you stay where you lay. If somebody hits the ground, nobody goes back. And I made them all agree to that. And I said, I'm trying to get as many of us out of here alive as I can, and if you go back, it's automatic death, and we know that from combat. So when I hit the ground, I immediately threw my hand out, thinking that one of them would grab it, and they were gone. I looked, and they were nowhere to be seen. And so I thought, they ran, and I thought, wait a minute, that was the rule. If you hit the ground, you stay where you lay. So in the meantime, this airplane is coming down, and it stops in midair.
I'll be praying for you.
And I look up at it, and I'm like, I'll be praying for you. I'll be praying for you. Whoa, something weird, man. And then I listened, and the artillery had been coming in all around us to keep the enemy from reinforcing each other. And the artillery rounds, there were no explosions, they just stopped. I didn't hear anything. And then I looked around, there was a tank sitting right beside of the TOC that had been killed during the night. And when we came out, smoke was sort of wisping out of it like that. And I looked back at the tank, and the smoke was dead still. It wasn't moving. I said, and I'll be praying for you, I'll be praying for you. I said, oh man, this is unreal. And then I thought, oh, wait a minute, I understand, I'm dying. I've lost a sense of motion, I've lost a sense of sound, and pretty soon I'll be blind, and concurrently at the same time, this warmth, kind of a sort of a jelly or cream or something was starting on top of my head and starting to come down my body. It was very warm and comforting. And I thought, that's death. I thought, pretty soon I won't be able to see, and I won't, I won't feel anything from here, and then it'll just keep going down, and I'll be dead. I said, oh, it's not as bad as folks give the impression,
Tanks are coming your way. I'm out of rockets. You mark the trail at the east entrance of the camp. Let me go ahead. I think I can get it. Do you want us to put something on that tank? No. Where do you want the bombs? Put the bombs just to the south of the Green Star cluster to get the tank. We're moving off the hill.
After a rare conversation with his creator and a pact he made with his men, Longgrear and the remaining Green Berets made their effort to escape the camp. Longgrear's men left the bunker and ran one direction. He went the other direction to cover the escape. For 43 years, Paul Longgrear has talked about what happened next. Skeptics balk at the account, but his story has not changed since the fall of Lang Vei.
I actually started to relax, and at that time I heard these footsteps, and so I thought, what dirty little slime, and so I took my rifle, I was going to hit him, and I looked around, and there stood God, and so I immediately went into a fetal position. I had heard about God. I grew up in America, You watch TV, you hear, back then, you know, we went to school, we said the Pledge of Allegiance, and we had prayer. The only prayer I ever had was at school. And so I knew there was a God. I mean, I knew that. Come on, I was a grown man. I wasn't an idiot. And but I didn't have any relationship with God. And I'd heard that he had a son named Jesus. I'd heard that. Growing up in America, everybody's heard that, surely. And somebody said something about he died for you. Well, that was the breaking point for me. Nobody ever died for me. Nobody really loved me. I was not lovable, and I knew that. But this, you know, there stood God, and this, I'll be praying for you, I'll be praying for you, and this warmth is moving over my body. And so when I go into the fetal position, everything is dead silent, you know, and he says to me, God speaks to me, and he says, what are you going to do now? And I thought, ooh, I said I wasn't asking anything from me. And he said, what are you going to do now? And so I'm like, that's the God. That's the God talking to me. What do you say to the God? You know, I didn't know the Roman Road or the Sinner's Prayer. I didn't know all that stuff. You know, I'm thinking, what do you say to God, man? I mean, down in that bunker, I was dying. I was a bad dude. Look, God, you take care of my wife and kid, you know. But I was kind of talking to a God that I wasn't even sure existed, maybe. And here he is. I mean, he's standing there, and he's talking to me, and he's waiting on me, and tears came to my eyes. And so I was thinking, what do you say to God, man? And then after what seemed some period of time, I don't know if it was a second or 2 or 3 minutes or something, he said, what are you going to do now? And I'll be praying for you. I'll be praying for you. All of a sudden, I realized that I had an option. I had to make a choice. I was either going to submit my life to him. It didn't mean I was going to live now. There wasn't no bargain going on. I was either going to submit my life to him, or I was going to not have a life with him. And if I got out of there alive, I still would be in the same boat I was in. I'll be praying for you, be praying for you. So in frustration, I just cried out and I said, you remember the airplane tipped its wings? Gave me the hope. I said, God, I don't want to die, not now. That was all I said. And the airplane took back. Explosion. I look around the tank. The tank is the smoke is whispering. I look around and he's gone. I'm laying there, great peace and love. For the first time in my life, I felt like somebody loved me.
At home, Patty, still living with her father while Paul was in Vietnam, turned on the evening news and was shocked by what she saw.
North Vietnamese troops, using tanks for the first time in the war, attacked the outpost of Lang Vei, defended by 24 Green Beret advisors and 400 Vietnamese militiamen. At least 13.
You have to understand that during a wartime situation like that, the people at home, their life is revolving around the news. The night that they said that Lang Vei had been overrun by tanks, it was a huge news story because it was the first time that they used Russian tanks in the war. And Paul had written my dad a letter, and I didn't know it until later, that about the fact that he was going there and it looked like there was going to be trouble. So Daddy was a little bit more in tune to things. So we knew that's where he was. I had gotten a letter the day before saying that he was going there. And so I knew that's where he was. Well, the first newscast said that there were 8 Americans left alive. And there were 2 Americans on the newscast. So that kind of, 8 minus 2 leaves 6. And so, and Paul was not one of the 2.
In driving anyone out of the bunker.
We knew that he was in that battle, but we didn't hear any news. And every time the doorbell rang, you just froze, but you just wait, and no news is good news.
She and her father immediately began to make calls. And then a startling call came, in which Longgrear's mother said her son's picture was on the front page of a Memphis newspaper.
She was hysterical on the phone, and she said, he's alive. She'd seen this picture in the Memphis newspaper, and she said, that's him. I know that's him. Well, there was no name on it. And so Daddy and I got in the car, and went to all the places that sold newspapers. We couldn't find a newspaper that had the picture. And so my father called the airlines, Delta Airlines, and he said, if you will bring that paper to Columbus, I'll pay for the airline, I'll pay for a seat. And so we met the airplane at the airport in Columbus the next morning, and all the crew came out with the newspaper. I mean, they knew the story and they wanted to see the reaction.
Paul and the other wounded survivors were flown to Japan for medical treatment, but 3 of his soldiers, Burke, Lindewald, and Moreland, never left the camp.
This house is a chaos house. You know, you've got babies and all these people, teenagers. My sister was a teenager and all of her friends over. So the phone rings and it was Paul calling from Japan. He said, hey, baby, how are you doing? And, you know, I didn't know he was going to call it. I had no warning. So anyway, in the midst of the conversation, he told me he was saved. And I said, I know. He didn't know about the newspaper. He didn't know about it being in Newsweek. He didn't know about the television reports. And so our communication, and then he said, no, I got religion. And I was in shock. I mean, because I didn't know what this head wound was, so I wasn't sure he had his right mind. I didn't know. So that was the first time. That was the initial shock.
The Longgrears arrive at Lang Vei not knowing what to expect. Paul Longgrear hopes that Colonel Pham will be a professional soldier, and he is pleased to find out that he is. The meeting is awkward at first, but before long, the old soldiers are exchanging memories of the battle.
I have read in Vietnamese books and magazines that one company came up Highway 9 and one company went down to Lang Troy and came that way and before they spread out. Is that correct?
Yeah. Trong cái tài liệu mà ông ấy đọc được thì là có 2 mũi do một đại đội thì tiến vào ở phía đằng đường 9 và một đại đội thì tiến từ phía sông lên, có phải không?
Tôi có một cái tư liệu vẽ tay.
I just draw it myself.
Okay.
To show you.
Và trên hướng này xe trang tăng chúng tôi vào sớm 2 tiếng.
And
chờ dốc Làng Choài.
In this direction, the tank came 2 hours before the
xếp hàng 1 chờ.
Before the agreed time.
2
hours ahead of time.
Không triển khai được đội hình.
So we could not deploy because we came early. Then we have to
sớm 2 tiếng.
2 hours ahead of schedule.
Yeah, they were very excited.
Vì hướng này bị sa lầy và bộ binh đến chậm. Và chúng cũng chưa tới giờ.
Pham wants to know where in the bunker Longgrear shielded himself from the grenades and flamethrowers the NVA used while attempting to roust the Green Berets. He's surprised to hear that there were 8 Americans in the bunker.
The bunker, there were 8 men that stayed in the underground bunker at the end of the battle. And they threw in grenades and the flamethrower and everything.
Could you draw the design of the bunker?
Yes. Okay. I'm not an artist.
Ông bảo ông không phải họa sĩ đâu nhé.
Không.
Just for my understanding, sorry.
No, it's okay.
Ở trong đó thì có.
There were columns.
Có những cái cột, the wooden one.
To hold up the ceiling. Okay.
The wooden one.
And over here were the radio. The hole in the wall was right there. There were also little firing, breathing ports for air.
Có cái lỗ thông hơi ở đấy.
Like this, okay? And they were pouring in gasoline in these.
Đổ xăng dầu vào. Lúc đó có đổ xăng đổ dầu vào.
And also they were throwing in the grenades.
Đồng thời là có ném lựu đạn vào.
And the flamethrower set everything on fire.
Thế còn hỏi thêm một điều nữa, thế lúc đó ông ở đâu?
Where were you
Trong
then?
cái lúc mà như thế này ông ngồi đâu? Ông chỉ đốt vào cái điểm ngồi. Điểm ngồi cơ. Điểm ngồi cụ thể. Góc này, góc này, góc này, góc này. Tôi đâu ngồi đâu, tôi mới hỏi đâu ngồi đâu. Trong cái hỏi này. Trong cái điều kiện đấy
He's very curious. Exactly, where were you in the bunker?
Where was I in the bunker?
Tôi nói trước vậy.
Cho ông ấy nói.
Tôi hiểu.
Vâng, vâng.
Right there.
Không phải. Đâu. No.
No what?
Ông bảo là ông ở đây.
Đây tôi hiểu này.
Vâng.
Lúc đó ít nhất cái hầm nó phải có một cái dạng. Chúng tôi hiểu đấy, mà sau này phân tích ra tôi hiểu nó như thế này này. Dù kiểu gì thì các ông vẫn phải có một cái ô riêng. Một là nằm bên cạnh. Đây có đường thoát.
I was thinking that you have some compartment in there.
Mà cửa ấy phải là cửa bọc thép.
No, there was no compartment.
Hoặc là cửa bê tông.
There was this one.
Đây là tôi giả định.
But
Tôi giả định thôi.
Plywood.
Còn toàn bộ cái này nếu ở đây hết.
Này.
Thế thì tại sao ở đây mà tồn tại được? Có nếu không thì ít nhất trong
How
ô
could
này.
you survive?
God.
Thế mà vẫn tồn tại.
No.
Nhớ Chúa.
No.
This is the lucky man who made it out of the bunker.
Đây chính là cái người đàn ông mà may mắn là sống sót ở khi ra khỏi cái
This is
hầm đó.
Saigon. This is the helicopter that I come off of.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Tôi mong rằng chúng ta cầm những bức ảnh này
We hope that
để quên đi những quá khứ đau buồn của hai quốc gia.
we can leave aside, we can set aside the sorrow, and it's just a memory.
Những người lính trực tiếp trong chiến đấu, tôi bị thương 3 lần.
I have 3 times wounded.
Yeah.
Because I got involved into the fighting.
Vô cùng cảm thông với cái người trong ảnh này.
I very much sympathize with the man in this picture.
Mong rằng hai dân tộc chúng ta sẽ sớm quên đi cái buồn đau ngày xưa và vươn tới những cái tốt đẹp.
We hope that we will set aside the sorrow and the pain in the past and look forward to the future.
I have looked forward to meeting someone from that battle for many years.
Thực sự là tôi cũng rất là muốn từ rất lâu rồi.
To show them that I have no ill feelings at all. Thank you. My pleasure. My pleasure.
Longgrear is standing only yards away from where his soldiers Lindewald, Burke, and Moreland died. Lindewald and the soldier who fell on top of him, Kenneth Hanna, were both recovered and returned to the United States for burial early in 2005. Longgrear was at both funerals. And in February 2011, Longgrear's medic, Sergeant James Moreland, was recovered and brought home as well.
I've seen my mother fall apart twice, and they were both very, very brief moments. One was when right before my grandfather died, and then the other time I saw her become very emotional was at Moreland's funeral. And this totally took me by surprise. I would have never in a million years guessed that my mother, who is such a rock and so emotionally controlled, would have had this reaction, but they did a flyover, and it's referred to as a missing man flyover, and the planes are going in and that last man falls off and rolls to the side. And when that plane rolled off to the side, she turned and just fell against me crying, and she said that could have so easily been your daddy.
When Longgrear completed the funeral, he was physically and emotionally exhausted. Questions about the whereabouts of a soldier he left behind were over.
Well, I didn't bring home Lindewald. I didn't bring home Thompson. I didn't bring home Brandy. It was all the same. I just had the advantage of knowing where Moreland was. I went into that battle, a total of 7 men, and I came out with 2 of us. Moreland was just another victim, and I don't know how that's going to play on TV or anywhere else, but that's just professional soldierism.
It was an emotional time, especially when the flyover. That was, kind of it broke the somberness of the moment. It was powerful, but it was a good day because it was a closure day.
When that funeral was over, I just passed out. Not because of Moreland. Moreland had been dead 41 years. But because of his family. They had to spend 41 years not knowing. I knew where Moreland was, but they were missing a loved one. And so, to bring his remains home and to give them to them brought closure to them.
But now there's that burning thing to find the answer to the other two.
This is the request.
At the conclusion of his meeting with Colonel Pham at Lang Vei, Longgrear passes a handwritten message to his Vietnamese peer. He inquires about the 5 American soldiers captured at Lang Vei. In reality, only 3 were officially listed as prisoners. The question is intended to provoke a response about the 2 soldiers never recovered.
Vâng, là có cái thông tin về 2 người lính.
Xin cảm ơn nhiều.
Many of soldiers have died from old age now.
Tất cả hầu như là nhiều cái người mà từng tham gia chiến đấu đều đã già hoặc là chết đi rồi.
But there are 2 families that have the weeping heart, the crying heart. The families of the 2 men that I gave him the name and asked him, please see if he can help find these 2 men. Just what happened? Did they bury them? It's okay.
Tức là có cái thông tin, tức là thì cũng nếu có thông tin thì cũng mong các ngài cung cấp.
And then everyone will have peace in their heart, including me and him.
Và tất cả mọi người thì đều được trở về bình yên khi mà tìm được người thân.
Là ngay trên đường chúng tôi rút ra thì cũng bị máy bay và pháo truy đuổi.
I would like to share the feeling. I would like to tell you the truth, the fact that when we were withdrawing, we also lost. There was a shelling in. There was a bomb. When we were withdrawing. Mm-hmm. So I'm not sure about any information about the other friends of yours.
Yeah.
But because when we captured the prisoner, we took them out, and many things could happen with them, unfortunately.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But most units, professional units, will record. You know, they will look at the dog tag. You know, and they will say died. You know, captured and died. It's no problem what happened. Even if some soldier killed him, it's not a problem. It's just that the family would like to know, were they captured, were they killed? If he can't find, it's no problem. But I believe that he is a man of honor and he will try.
So Jim Holt is like MIA? No information?
Yeah, Jim Holt, no information.
Không có thông tin gì cả. Vâng.
Yeah.
Còn ông chính viên của chúng tôi đưa về được rồi.
The only thing that I have to go on is I have 6 Vietnamese publications written by the People's Army of Vietnam, the National Office of Vietnam, and in there it says that the people who attacked, the 325th, I think, who attacked Lang Vei, captured 5 American prisoners. 3 came home. 2 have never been accounted for. And if he can find them, I would be appreciative. If he can't, I understand.
Những đứa trẻ mất cha, chúng ta đều không muốn.
We are the soldiers, so we obey and we have to fight. But no family want to leave, want to say goodbye to their father, their son, or their husband.
Amen. God bless.
Xin cảm ơn. Mong ông được.
Longgrear's letter pleads for a renewed search for the remains of Sergeant Danny Phillips and James Holt, 2 American patriots left behind on the field of battle. The end result, he said, will be peace for the families. But recovering their remains may bring an equal amount of peace for all the Lang Vei survivors, especially for him. After Paul Longgrear's encounter with his Creator, he found a renewed purpose in his life. He would be a better soldier and husband, but he would also become a preacher, and later, a missionary. He would tell others about the Jesus he met at Lang Vei. Longgrear's life since Lang Vei could be explained by skeptics in a number of ways. Some might say his head wound made him delirious. Some might say his endorphins, a rush of adrenaline, caused him to imagine his divine encounter. But to Paul Longgrear's family and friends, there is no other way to explain the change in his life.
I think the Lord probably set a number of things in motion, and the one thing that was a defining moment was when he was drafted. And that gave him structure and a purpose. And then as time moved forward and he went through OCS and then Vietnam, and he had a father-in-law who was a full colonel, all those small successes and then a role model probably reaffirmed who he was.
He's his own man. Daddy is his own man, and he has a principle base, and he acts according to that, and he's not going to be influenced or swayed by others around him to try to modify to the group, but he follows his moral compass and the principles that he believes in.
He's a godly man. He's a leader in every regard. Very few situations have I ever seen him in, if at all, when he was not in some way leading. Maybe not out front, maybe from behind the scenes, but he had an effect on whatever group he was involved in.
I have been very interested on this trip and asking Daddy detailed questions. The purpose for that probably is because I know it's such an important part of his life, and because of that, it's a part of who I am as well.
Vietnam's been extremely powerful, I guess, that experience in our lives, and it's passed on from generation to generation.
But I think the being drafted and serving in the Vietnam War really impacted who he became.
It is this change in character brought about when a man reached the end of himself and found no hope other than what God offered him that prompts the question, did not the old Paul Longgrear die at Lang Vei?
That's where he lays. That's it. This is where the old man is.
And the life of this new man, he says, is easily described.
Perfect Jesus, perfect wife.